Welcome to another episode of Call to the Bullpen, where executive leaders from scaling startups through lower mid-market companies seek to make the right strategic decisions at the right time. I am Clint Overton.
And I'm Ted Stam.
And we are your hosts. This will be a new one for us today, Ted, as we're moving to a new era of Call to the Bullpen. Our good friend, Jason Carvalho, has turned his attention to his emerging venture capital fund, Humanus.vc. Just wanted to thank him for really all of his contributions of getting us started here. And we'll look forward in the future to hosting him in a future episode as a guest to fill us in on his progress. But as we turn our attention today to our newest episode, the value of annual planning, turning strategy into results. Today, we're going to dive into an important foundational exercise every team should go through. So looking forward to getting you guys started on another episode of Called the Bullpen today. And really just to kind of set the foundation for this conversation, most CEOs don't fail because they lack vision. They fail because they don't translate strategy into execution. Annual planning is not just a budget exercise, although we have a CFO here in the call that might say otherwise, but it is a decision-making and alignment tool. This is a common pain point I think we see in the companies that we serve, the scaling startup through that lower mid-market company. It's a place that a lot of companies don't spend time, but I think this is a place that really kicks off the foundation for a great year.
Yeah, and I guess what I would say as well is, the annual planning exercise is not just, as you mentioned, budgeting, although that is a part of it, which I think is a big part of it. But what I would also say is that you want to look back. What did you do right? What did you do wrong last year? What assumptions are you carrying in? What baggage is the leadership team bringing in with them? Because it's all part of it. And that's what ultimately makes the strategic vision and the ability to execute on that strategic vision, getting leadership buy-in from everyone that is a part of that leadership team.
Yeah, we just had the benefit of doing ours here a couple weeks ago. I really think about it as it really is truly kind of a reflection and a restart in many ways. So, kind of a clear the decks exercise. I mean, I think that there's a lot of good dialogue. I think it requires really good, honest conversation about what went well, like what did we think was going to happen. So as we went through the process last year of what our assumptions and risks and opportunities were going to look like, and then what actually happened, how did we react to it? And then, really, I think as a starting point before you get into the planning process for the following year is just really asking yourself, what did we learn? And based on what we learned, what are we going to do differently next year?
To add to that, I would say just as well, there's surprises in every business, both good and bad surprises that you see out there. And so it's those good surprises. Why did they happen? Is it repeatable? Those surprises that aren't so great, how do we avoid those pitfalls again? I mean, you can't see everything in the crystal ball, but there is a lot that you can learn from the previous year and years that you can carry over into your annual planning session.
And I know you've heard me say this, and I've got like my fair share of analogies that I like to use. One of those is just, the old adage of you're setting out on like a really important trip. And what's like the very first thing that you do is you plug in the destination of where you're going, especially if it's someplace you've never gone before. And the guidance and the steps and the actions you got to take to get to that destination. To me, the planning process, really basic analogy is very much the same thing. But if you just go into next year's exercise and go, well, we're just going to grow by 10% or we're going to grow by 50%, which I see so many companies doing. Like, how did you come up with that number? Why is it 10 or 15? What are the headwinds that are going to be in the way? Is the market congruent with what you're selling in your organization? Are there changes that you need to make in order to accomplish it? Is there a reason why you can only do 10 or 15%? Is there a path to 25%? What are the actions associated with that? And so I think so many companies just kind of skip over this exercise and go through like let's do plus 10% of what we did last year. That sounds like a good idea. Because in some cases, I'm not sure that they want to put in the work and they just don't know how to get started. What are the critical steps and actions you should go through? So I know you mentioned a little bit about the fact that there's a reflection exercise that you go through to evaluate how the last year went, but Maybe you could talk a little bit about what are some of the key things that you should be looking at as you're laying out the plan for the coming year?
I think first, just to take a step back with your GPS analogy, the starting point, what your destination is. What happens along the way, though, is not always what you planned. And so, that GPS, as much as it's living and breathing and trying to give you the right guidance, the annual plan is also a living and breathing document. And so it's not, hey, let's go ahead. We're gonna put this all on paper. We're gonna put this all on a spreadsheet. We're not going to deviate from this plan at all. This is exactly how it's going to work. And the reality is that's just not how it typically works with a company. And so there are adjustments that are made. And so you put the annual plan in place, but you don't shelve it after you put the annual plan in place. You look at it on a monthly, on a quarterly basis, and you should be making adjustments to it. It's a living and breathing document. And so much like if there's an accident on your way with a GPS, it's going to navigate you around that, or hopefully it's going to navigate you around it. It's the same way with an annual plan.
No, I love that, and that's a great example. And candidly, just the reality of life is that, and no different than life when you're running a business, there's things that you expect that are going to happen that do happen, and there's a lot of things that you don't expect that happen as well. And it's really about how you react to those things. But I think the other part of it too is that I think there's a lot of businesses, especially that are growing and don't necessarily have like the experience of really building, the kind of the cadence and professional infrastructure that you and I are accustomed to and have a lot of experience with, that recognize that that happens. Like they've been running their business for a number of years and they're like, oh yeah, something happens and we get together as a team and we kind of react to it. But I think really the foundation that we're in structure that we're trying to recommend for people to have is to really have not just where am I going and how I'm going to get there, but then what are all the other things that you're evaluating to evaluate progress. And so things like not just setting, here's what the revenue goal is for the end of the year, but here's what our goals are by month. Here are the metrics that matter to our organization that are going to help us demonstrate kind of the progress points associated with achieving those specific results. Having those key indicators that identify that here's some potential risks to the business. And so we're not waiting until we've slammed into the side of a building to realize we need to do something. We're actually seeing it before it happens. We're reacting kind of more proactively than kind of after the fact, and allows us to kind of stay ahead of things. Because I think, as I think about companies that I've worked with and you've worked with, and in companies that we've supported even in our own business at Boulder and Bullpen, is there's pieces and parts that people do, but they don't really put the whole framework together. So maybe just talk a little bit about really well-performing organizations you've been in and how they utilize metrics and the meetings infrastructure to kind of stay on.
Well, I think an easy one is, looking at leading and lagging indicators. And so when you look specifically at the sales part of an organization, pipeline, especially when you're doing annual planning, is incredibly important. And it's not just the sales pipeline. There's marketing pipeline that's involved as well. And so understanding those lagging indicators, like what historically has been our days to close a deal, what does it look like from opportunity to close? Great lagging indicator. It actually helps us with our annual planning when we're looking forward. So does the pipeline even support what your sales goals are? Because, as far as indicators are concerned, you can look at your historical pipeline that should translate into what you're looking at for pipeline going into 2026. And can you really support those growth goals that we talked about at the beginning? So, there are pieces of that in every function inside of an organization. And it's what is really propelling us forward? What do we know? What are the unknowns? What are the assumptions we're making behind those unknowns? Why do we believe that those assumptions are ultimately going to lead to long-term success, 5%, 10%, 50% growth? What is the basis of that? Because you definitely don't want to go into a year hoping that your revenue is going to support your growth goals if you don't have empirical facts that are going to support that.
No, I love that. And I think some of the things that you're talking about around 5%, 10%, 50% is there's always this kind of push and pull in the marketplace. And so things like things changing in the market that's going to impact the demand of your product or service? What are the competitive dynamics? So are there new players out there that you're having to go head to head with that maybe you weren't having to go head with before? Is there specific pricing pressure? Like if you're in manufacturing, obviously there's supply chain questions. There's questions about tariffs. Do you need specific talent in your organization at any level of your organization in order to be able to hit those goals? So can we get enough butts and seats and the right butts and seats to get that work done? And then, even environmentally, in terms of the type of industry that we're in, sometimes there's regulatory or other factors out there that might impede our progress or might create tailwinds. And so these are all things, right, that should contribute to those numbers.
Well, and yeah, I guess the other thing I would say is just to go more back to the basics, having the leadership team all in alignment. Do we actually have the right initiatives on our plate? Can we actually execute on all of those initiatives? Again, historically, have we missed revenue? Why have we missed revenue? Have we fixed that problem? Is there a way to fix the problem? Do we need new lines coming through? I mean, those are all things that I think surround that.
No doubt about it. And, I think the other part of it too is I know we're kind of throwing a lot of things kind of out there in terms of what's, where are we at now? Where are we trying to go to? What did we learn from last year? What's happening in the marketplace and how do we set these goals? But I think the other part of it too is also being very realistic going into a year and saying, okay, we can't have 27 number one priorities. So what are those like 3 to 5 things that are going to be the difference makers in terms of us being successful? It's not just going to be necessarily just putting our head down and hoping for the best and doing the same thing we've always done. What are those 3, 4, 5 things that we need to do? And some of them could be how we're trying to mitigate the risks of the headwinds that we're dealing with in order to continue to keep the progress that we've seen in the past. And then also are some things that maybe we're looking to do differently that are going to be accelerants to what we're doing that are going to take us to the next level. But being really realistic about the fact that is it just that we want to do it? And more importantly, how are we going to do it? And potentially, are there investments associated with that as well?
And I think that's something that every company should be looking at, more than likely are looking at. And it's, what is the capital consumption? What does it look like? At some point we have to get away from everything being led by the founder. We need that leadership team to step up. Again, it's not just on the sales side, it's on the operations side, it's on the accounting and finance side of it. It's bringing all of that talent together, finding that roadmap that we all agree on, and then beginning down that path and being willing to make changes along the way. I mean, we can't just set a concrete road out there and assume that we're all going to follow it, because things happen throughout the year. And the ability to flex and make changes is a big part of the annual planning process and moving forward and having that willingness to make those changes.
Yeah, and there's obviously a lot of good stuff there, Ted. But one of the things in particular that I call out that you said that I love is just that inward look to say, do we have the right people in the right seats is kind of what you're talking about. And so even moving your company from who we've been to who we want to become and really having like those tough conversations to say, if we want to get to that next level, are we really good enough in the, it's one thing that we want to be good enough in a specific seat, but are we realistically good enough? So do we have the right person in rev ops from sales to marketing? Do we have the right professionalization in our finance and accounting organization? Are we a scaling organization, and do we really need to invest in human capital and have like that right people operations mindset with somebody who has, senior HR experience that says, here's how you build like a first class organization to bring on the right people, onboard them for success, ensure that you retain them, ensure that there's continuous improvement. Like there's all these things that are happening. And I think there's so many companies that year after year after year, they're like, we're growing, but we're not growing as fast as we want to. And candidly, if they just kind of looked in the mirror, they're probably the biggest barrier to that success. So one, having those really honest, difficult conversations with themselves as the leader or leaders, having that friction discussion as a leadership team, and then really going through a process like this to say like, how are we really going to make this happen finally? Let's stop talking about it. Let's put this into an actionable plan that we can all see as a path to success.
Well, and to your point, I think it comes down to intellectual honesty. It's not just with the CEO or founder himself or herself. It is, can I be intellectually honest with my leadership team? Can I point out, yes, here's what you're great at. Here's where we need improvement. Is the reality that you can step up in this role and provide us what we're looking for to get to that next level, whether it's getting from 10 million to 20 million or 20 million to 50 million? Can the leadership team grow with the company? And if they can't, be honest with them. You are great in this role, and this is where we see your future with the company, but we need somebody that's been through it. And I think that's part of the annual planning process as well. And to your point, right butts in the right seats. I mean, that's part of what you're looking at when you're going through this exercise.
As we're kind of thinking through this and starting to think about putting kind of a bow on this conversation, there's a couple of things that I don't think we've touched on that are, I think, impediments to success. So mistakes that oftentimes a CEO or founder of an organization is going to make in the planning process. So one that I love is planning in isolation, right? So I came up with all these things, just kind of go with my number.
Mhm.
Trust me on this. Right? Having a budget, without a strategy, which we kind of talked about at the beginning, which is like the plus 10% or 15%, but like nothing to support it. And the thing that I really believe this, especially for companies that are growing, and with the risk of maybe insulting a listener or two who's a CEO or founder listening to this conversation, is just like giving your team a little more credit than you do. Like, I recognize that you're really smart, like, you maybe founded this company or you get hired into this role, and so you are really smart and you add a lot of value. But for an organization to be really successful, it's not just all about you. Like, you gotta surround yourself with other smart people, and you gotta allow them to contribute to the success. And so, I mean, to me, there's nothing worse than hearing a team say, "Oh, yeah, well, so and so, we're supposed to hit this number this year, but I don't know how the heck we're gonna do that."
Well, I mean, but again, that's part of what we've been talking about. I mean, that is, the revenue piece is a huge part of the annual planning process because, how are we justifying the new customers, the new revenue that's coming through the door? Are we actually looking at our historical customers? Are we going to keep those, retain those customers that we have? From a standpoint of what does it look like from pricing? I mean, you talk about tariffs in the manufacturing world. That's something that every CEO, everyone on that leadership team should be looking at. And then, what else do we have to offer the market? And so, I don't think you can look at a leadership team, say CEO has decided that we're going to hit number X without having input. And again, it's not just from the sales leader, it's from everyone on that leadership team. There needs to be buy in, there needs to be cohesiveness with that team because if it's just one person dictating what's going to happen, I think that's one way that you're going to fail right out of the gate. I mean, they say, now you put a budget together and when is it wrong? Well, the minute after that you've decided it's final. And so you can look at that from a sales standpoint as well. Let's get the buy in of everyone. Let's all work towards that same goal. And if we're all working towards that same goal and we believe in it, there's a lot more chance of success.
No, agree. And one of the things that I think is really important, and I think you kind of hinted at this, but maybe even said a little bit more explicitly as we kind of think about it. Some closing thoughts here as we're kind of closing out the conversation today would be that the leadership team needs to have buy-in. Like, this can't be tops down. And so, that dreaded word accountability, which I think, there's people are in certain operating systems and they use that word like nobody in an organization really knows what that means. But I think to have great accountability, especially in the planning process, is bringing your leadership team along for the ride, allowing them to contribute to the decisions around here's what the strategy is, here's what the goals are, how we're going to achieve that. They are in their specific area of responsibility, contributing to that final decision, raising their hand and saying, I can own this, and then holding them accountable to that along the way. And that's so much easier for cohesion in your team during the course of the year versus somebody told me this is what I've got to do. I've never believed in that. And so, how do you expect the team to win when there's one person in a corner office doing all the work by themselves, right?
Right. And I think that brings up a great point as well. I mean, how are we measuring that? I mean, so let's just say everybody's bought in. How are we measuring the success of each of those leaders? What are we doing from a KPI standpoint? Are we reviewing this on a monthly basis? Are we reviewing it on a quarterly basis, annual basis? And when are we making changes? Has there been a decision by the leadership team? Yes, we're going to look at this. Yes, we're making the decisions on whether we're being successful or not. When do we make those adjustments? Are we looking at, again, are we looking at it on a monthly basis, making adjustments? Are we looking at a quarterly basis and making adjustments? I think that's an important point.
Yeah, and as we kind of close out the episode today, I mean, I think just like really quick recap is make sure you have a clear destination, make sure you have a plan to achieve it. Bring your leadership team along for the ride, have clear accountability because there's ownership in their participation in the process. And then as you go throughout the course of the year, don't just stick it on a shelf and let it accumulate dust, but make it part of a normal routine in terms of weekly KPIs, monthly operating review, quarterly business review, be forecast based on what's actually happening, right? But these are the things that are really keys to success. And otherwise, you're making hope your strategy.
And as we all know, hope's not a strategy.
Well, Ted, Stan, it's been a joy, a great conversation today. If you liked our episode today, please check us out on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Please subscribe so that you can check us out on our next episode that is coming out soon. Or you can also visit us at Call to the Bullpen. Would really love it if you would rate our episode today and give us some great feedback. But until then, we'll see you next time. I'm Clint Overton.
And I'm Ted Stan.
See you soon.